And now I would like to turn today's program over to our presenter. We are very happy to have Rivka Schwartz here with us today to talk about staying healthy through the winter. Rivka, thank you very much for joining us today.
No problem. Glad to be here. All right. So today we're going to be talking about winter health and how to, just like some basic things of how to stay healthy through the winter and some different herbals. I'd like to just start with introducing myself, a little bit more in-depth introduction of what we'll be doing. So once again, my name is Rivka Schwartz, and I am an herbalist, and that means very little to most people. So what that means for when I am practicing as an herbalist, and this will be reflected in how I talk about winter health, is looking at things very holistically. And so if somebody were to come to me with whatever condition, and if you think about the things that I'll work with, kind of think of a general practitioner from about 100 years ago. So it could be arthritis, chronic pain, digestion, respiratory illnesses. And I'll look with the person, we'll talk for quite a while, really listening to you to see what's going on, and looking for what are the causes of what's happening, not just what are the symptoms and working with symptoms, but really going in depth to seeing what's causes and what's at the root of what's happening and working with that, and working holistically, which means looking at diet, sleep, how does the person deal with stress, all of those different things, and also working with herbs. So that's a little bit about my background as a holistic healthcare herbalist. So today's topic is winter health, and specifically viruses, and what do we do about the different viruses that are circulating around and stay healthy with this happening. So when I'm doing this, and I'm going to be looking down because that's just where my notes are. So we'll look a little bit about the immune system and how to support our immune system, and that in the context of wellness and then the different stages of illness. We'll get some background just about viruses and how do they work, and then we're looking specifically at immune support herbs and antivirals. So when we're thinking about the immune system and how to stay healthy over time, I kind of think about it the same way as we think about the food pyramid. So this is kind of like a health pyramid. And at the bottom of this health pyramid are all the things we do for just basic healthy living. And then the next layer on top of that is going to be just thinking about, okay, let's say something is going around. What are the things that we can do that can help with prevention from actually getting sick if we know that there's things circulating, or that maybe we've perhaps been exposed to something? Then the next layer of this would be, what if you're actually coming down with something? What do you do as you're coming down with something? And then the tip of the pyramid would be, what happens when you're actually sick? So there's some different approaches to these things. So if we're going from, in general, from a more modern medical approach, we would be looking at what is the cause of this? And so we would say it's a virus, it's a bacteria. So there would be some kind of thing that we're looking at like that. And then if it's a bacteria, how do you kill it? Or something, if it's a chronic disease, to think more about like something like diabetes. So there is some talk about what is happening with diet. And then how do you manage that disease? So there's drugs, maybe surgery, antibacterials, what are you going to be taking? And the body is kind of looked at more as a machine, and how do you work with that machine? Also, in general, the things that you'll be doing for any disease that you have or any illness is going to be something that you're going to either pick up from the pharmacy or maybe the doctor might be prescribing it. If we're coming from a more holistic sort of a view of things, so the World Health Organization actually has a really nice definition. So their definition of health is different. It's not just the lack of symptoms, which might be the modern medical definition. It would be health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And that's going to be very important as we're looking at how do we stay healthy, because you have just the one side that's just, okay, I don't have a disease. But what does that mean to actually really be healthy and be able to stay healthy? So in the 1800s, there was kind of a discussion between two scientists. So one was Pasteur, whom we know as pasteurization, right? And he discovered bacteria and that you could kill the bacteria if you have an antibiotic. And that's one road that medicine then traveled, was Pasteur. There was another man named Claude Bernard who said, okay, yes, there are the bacteria out there, but that's actually not the total picture. What's really important, as he said, is the habitat and the terrain. So if any of you out there are gardeners, think about how you garden. So when you have a plant, the first things you do is you make sure it's got good soil. It's being watered properly. It has all the nutrients it needs. It has the proper sunlight. It's got all of those good conditions. And then you know that that healthier plant is also going to have less diseases. It'll get blights and molds less, and it's going to have less infection by insects as well, just because it's healthier. And your weaker plants that maybe didn't get in the best soil or whatever, that's the plants that the things are going to go to. And it's the same thing with people. So was what Claude Bernard was saying. So if you think of any classroom, right, you've got those kids who, every single thing that comes around, that kid is going to be sick from it. And then you have those kids who never come down with anything. And the question is, okay, why? What are the things that are doing that? So when we're looking at what are those basics of health, right? What's that base layer that's out there? So one is going to just be, what are we eating, right? So that's the soil. What are the nutrients that we're giving our body? And do we have all the nutrients we need to fight disease and just to be healthy? So one thing would be just how nutrient dense is your diet. So are you eating meats and lots of vegetables, or are you having more empty calories? And empty calories also tend to be in things that are high in carbohydrates, refined sugars and refined carbohydrates. And those things, besides not having a lot of nutrients in them, are also pro-inflammatory. And sugar actually is an immune suppressant. So if you're worried about getting sick and you're going out and eating a lot of donuts or cake or things like that, that's actually going to be suppressing your immune system. So that would be something you would think about with diet. Another thing would just be what fats and oils are you taking in? And those things influence how much inflammation we have in the body. So some of the good oils that you could be using would be if you're using avocado oil, if you had olive oil, coconut oil, even butter. So some of those things would be good oils to be using, and your body actually needs oils to be able to function. Some of the oils that would be pro-inflammatory are those vegetable oils. So the corn oils and those things are more pro-inflammatory. And especially, and we'll talk about if somebody were, God forbid, to get COVID, how inflammation ties into that. So having a lower state of inflammation is going to be something that's going to be very helpful. When we think of our bodies, we think of it as just being, us and our cells. But really, we're a walking habitat. There are a lot of bacteria in our gut and all over our body. There's actually more bacteria in our guts than there are cells there's actually more genetic material in our guts than there are actually in our bodies ourselves. So, and those bacteria in our gut, it's almost like a whole other organ that we have. And we're just learning more and more about it now all of the time. But one of the things that we're seeing is that how healthy our gut microbiome is one of the things that regulates our immune system. Is it overactive? Is it underactive? So making sure that we're taking care of that bacteria is really important. So that might include something like making sure to eat probiotics. So that's your yogurt, and if live cultured sauerkraut or pickles, all of those things. So that's important. And they're seeing, so if you think of those, the bacteria in the yogurt that you're eating, that is going into your gut, and it's like a tourist that goes into a town. So it has things that it's doing while it's there, but it doesn't necessarily take up residence in there for the long term. But they're also showing that in these last couple of months, there have been a number of studies showing that those bacteria from the yogurt and from other probiotics or kombucha or whatever it is that we're taking in also influences what bacteria actually live inside of our guts. So how do we get good bacteria? So a big part of it is just when you're born up until the age of 3. That has a huge influence on what your gut microbiome would be. And so they used to say, or maybe they still say, that, every kid should eat a pound of dirt. Every kid should eat a pound of dirt. Maybe not literally, but studies show that the more a child is out and getting dirty and maybe has a dog that they're petting and they're getting all of those bacteria, that's helping and them build their microbiome. Even before that, just at birth, if somebody has a vaginal birth, you're getting the mother's bacteria also as a starter kit. As a person grows older, at some point, you have a basic set of bacteria that exist in your intestines, in your colon, but you can still influence it. So there's the probiotics, but really one of the most important things is the more vegetables and fruits and the bigger the variety that you're eating, the better you're able to feed whatever the bacteria that you have. And that really has an influence on how diverse your bacteria is and how healthy your bacteria are. So when you think about that and you say, eat the rainbow, so making sure you're eating lots of different kinds of vegetables and carrots and broccoli and whatever and different kinds of fruits, that's going to have a big influence on your microbiome. And by influencing that microbiome, you're actually influencing your immune system and how strong your immune system is. So that's one thing, would be just diet. And also, when we look at diets, So in our modern minds, medicine and diet are very separate things. But traditionally, up until the last few hundred years, maybe even less than that, what we eat and how we prepare things and what spices we use, people realize that that really can influence our health. And so the kitchen was a place of strength where people, usually a mother or a grandmother, might be thinking about what's happening in the health of her family and using what she cooks and how she cooks in order to influence the health. So we went to, a few years ago, we went to Chinatown in New York. And being an herbalist, I was very curious about the different herbs that were in the different stores and how you use them. And we went into the first shop and I was like, okay, what is this and how do you use it? And an older woman said, oh, this, you put it in soup, put it in soup. I was like, okay, well, what about this? That, put in soup, put in soup. I said, okay, I don't know, am I getting the brush off or what's going on here? Went to the next store. Well, what is this and how do you use it? And then an older woman would say, for this, you put in soup, you put in soup. And it got to be almost kind of a joke in our house. What do you do with this spice? What do you do with this herb? Oh, this, you put in soup, put in soup. But truthfully, the longer that I'm an herbalist and the longer I'm working with this, the more I put things in soup, right? I use them every day as part of my cooking or part of the teas that we're drinking, just as a part of the food that we have. And there are a lot of, and we'll look at some of them, a lot of really good just kitchen herbs and spices that are like super good for health. And people know turmeric, but ginger, wow, one of my very favorite herbs. And during a season with flus and colds, really a special herb to be using. Thyme, rosemary, a lot of our kitchen spices. It might just be the frequency or how much we're using of them, and just using them in a conscious way changes that from being just something that we're using to flavor our food, and it changes it into something maybe that we're thinking about our health with. So it can just be built in part just right into our cooking and into our everyday lives. Another really important thing is just getting enough sleep. And a lot of people have insomnia. And since COVID, a lot more people are having trouble with sleeping. But sleep is really important in terms of just keeping your immune system up and your health in general. When we're asleep, that's the time when our body does a lot of its repairs and takes care of things. And so it's really important we go through that cycle in sleep where we're doing reparations in the body. It used to be that on average, people would sleep at least 9 hours a night. In the United States at this point, the average amount of sleep is like 6 to 7 hours. So if somebody's getting 7 hours of sleep, we think, oh, wow, we got a really good night of sleep. So 7 hours at least, but if you can sleep more, that's even better. That is going to just add a lot of your ability for your body to be able to repair itself and just to have the energy to be able to function and to be healthy. Stress. And that's a big one. Also, even bigger now in these last few years. Having high stress levels actually suppresses your immune system. And so being able to, in some way, work with the stress, being able to either reduce it in some way maybe, or actually reduce it by, if you're doing something that's stressful, being able to change it so you're not doing that stressful thing. But that isn't always an option. So just all those different things that people do to help reduce stress. So that might be meditation. It might be going to the library and reading a book. it might be having some relaxing tea. It might like even just a nice cup of chamomile tea to drink. Going out in nature, going for a walk, all of those things that reduce stress. And they actually show that people who go for walks out in the woods or just out in the fields, blood pressure goes down, all the cortisol goes down, all of those different hormones that are raised when we're under stress are reduced. So that would be another thing, would just be to be reducing stress. Stress also plays a role in blood pressure, right? The more stressed we are, the more that can raise our blood pressure. And if we're stressed chronically, can lead to high blood pressure. So so when we're thinking about COVID, which also has an effect on the cardiovascular system, right? And they say to really be careful, making sure that you're taking care of any circulatory issues that you have. So one of those places is just looking at stress and looking at diet. Hydration. So actually drinking those 8 cups of water in a day is really big, or more, if you're working out or if it's during the summer. And having a humidifier in the winter. So the drier your system is, it can have an effect on digestion. It has effect on a lot of things. It can have an effect on your lungs. And some flus and COVID tend to create like a dry cough. And so the more hydrated you keep your lungs and your sinuses, the better. And also, the better hydrated you are, and this is a little gross sounding, but the more mucus you have. And so you need a mucosal layer that's healthy in your lungs and your digestive tract and in your sinuses. And that mucosal layer is actually a protective layer that traps viruses. And it has some antiviral and antimicrobial things in it as well. So you want to make sure that you're not just drying out here. And I know in the wintertime, when you have the heat running, that the humidity in the house can go as low as somebody who's living in a desert. So you really need to watch and make sure and see that the humidifier or something is going to help keep you the mucosal layer hydrated. Relationships. So the difference sometimes between health and not being healthy is just, being able to call somebody or to talk to somebody, or those relationships that you have. And the more research that's coming out, the more we're seeing that loneliness is something that really suppresses the immune system as well. And having relationships helps to build it, which is hard, especially in times when we're having quarantine and it's harder to get out and do things. But in some way, figuring out how to be able to keep up relationships is important for that as well. When we think about, so we talked about having a kind of a pyramid of looking at things. Another way to look at how to look at complementary health is, so on the one end, you've got food and lifestyle, which we've been talking about. And then if you start to get sick or there's something going around, you kind of bump it up, you go along this continuum, along this line, and you have herbs that have more immediate or more pronounced actions. At some point, you want to be taking medication or talk to your doctor. And, we certainly know with COVID, at some point, you definitely, need to be talking to the doctor or going to the hospital if you're having severe symptoms and having trouble breathing and stuff. So it's a continuum of complementary medicine that goes into going to the doctor and then heading towards the hospital. So before we go into, and I'd like to be able to talk about a number of herbs in specific, and then also just demonstrate making some different herbals. So in order to understand how some of these different herbs work and what we're doing, we kind of have to understand what is a virus and how does a virus actually work. So all right, hopefully I can do a share screen here. So here we have a picture. The big blobby looking thing is a cell, and those little spiky things that are there, those are viruses. So in order for a virus to make us sick, so a virus itself is, as opposed to a cell, which has a cell membrane, and then it has different things inside that allows the cell to be able to reproduce. A virus has basically a protein coating around it, and then it's got RNA or DNA inside of it, but it doesn't have a way on its own to be able to reproduce. So it has to find some kind of a host to be able to reproduce. So if you have, say, a cold or a flu virus, right? So in general, you'll breathe in the virus, and every virus has certain kinds of cells or certain things that it's looking for in the body that match it to be a host. So something like the flu or a cold or COVID tend to go into our respiratory system. And then you can see all those little spikes that are on the virus. And then on the cell itself, there are little spikes coming out. And those are like locks and keys. So the virus has a key, and it's looking for that lock on the cell that it can unlock. And then when it's attached, it can then create an opening in the cell. Once it's created an opening in the cell, it can inject its genetic materials inside of that cell. Once it's in the cell, right, this is like a Cold War, right? Each side is trying to be able to do something to stop the other side or to overcome what the other side is doing. The cell is, oh no, there's something invading inside of me. I don't want this here. And it's going to make like a little bubble around the genetic material that's come from the virus. And the virus is then like, okay, yeah, great. You've done this to try to stop me, but I have things inside that can make a hole in this bubble you've put around me, and I can get back out into the cell. So the virus then comes out of that little, if it's managed, it comes out of that little bubble, and then it hijacks the reproductive system of the cell itself so that it can reproduce its RNA or its DNA or whatever it's got in there. And it's going to reproduce and reproduce and reproduce. And then it will start to actually bulge out on the cell. So there's like a little bud. And then at some point that bud is going to burst. And then you've got all that virus is then able to continue to move on and find more cells. So one virus came in, hijacked a cell, created lots more replicas of itself, burst out, and now it's ready to go invade more cells. When you're looking at either herbal antivirals or medications that are antivirals like Tamiflu or something like that, as opposed to bacteria, where we have antibiotics that can just go in and kill the bacteria. 48 hours later, most of the bacteria is gone, and you're up, hopefully, or start to be up, and you can be out in public again because the bacteria is gone. But what most things that are called antivirals do is they're able to jump in and stop replication at some point in that process. So ginger, and I think also Tamiflu, they stop the virus from being able to create the hole in the cell to get in. So it's stopping replication there. Some things stop the virus from being able to come out of the bubble. So there's different points in the replication that herbs or medicines can stop the replication. And that has certain things that it tells us about how to use those herbs and those medications. And this new COVID pill that they have that they say might be helping with symptoms, and I can't think of the name right now, right? But they're saying you have to take that in the first couple of days. That's when you need to take it. And that's also true of if you're taking herbs like ginger, things like that, that are antivirals, because what you're doing is you want to stop the replication. If you wait till day 6 and that virus is already everywhere in your body and it's been happily replicating for days and days and days, and then you send in something to help stop replication, it's a little too late at that point to really be able to do what it could have done if you started using it at the very beginning. By the very beginning, so I know, and I do this myself, right? So you start feeling a little bit under the weather and you're like, okay, I'm a little under the weather, but I'm not so bad. I can still push it a little bit and I can still do something. It's a little different now with COVID because, you really have to, the second you're sick, you have to worry about if it's COVID. But like with the flu or some things like that, right? Tend to think, okay, if I can go for another day and then I have a day when I can take a day off, right? But that's not how the virus is working. That's only our time schedule, not its time schedule. And so the sooner, like the second you even think, well, I'm a little achy and my nose is a little runny and whatever, that is when you jump on it and you start taking the herbs. That's when you get into bed and you let your body use all those defense systems that your body already has to help. So you get into bed and that's when you start to rest. That's not, I've got COVID and I'm quarantined and so I'm going to get up. I don't feel so bad, so I'm going to clean my closet because now I'm finally home. No, that isn't, I'm going to clean my closet day. That is, okay, I'm sick. I've got something. I'm going to take care of this day. And right away getting into bed or just lying down and letting your body have the strength to be able to work with whatever you've got. So a lot of times when we get sick, we want to suppress the symptoms, right? Because it's miserable. Maybe you've got a runny nose or a cough or a sore throat or whatever is going on, or just achy, and we have a fever, right? And so the immediate response that we want to have is this, I don't want to feel like this. I'm going to take something to stop that. So maybe we take ibuprofen or one of those things, right, to bring the fever down and to reduce the aches and chills. Maybe we take something to stop the runny nose. Maybe we take something that's going to suppress the cough because, we just don't like coughing this much. So we try to suppress the symptoms. But if you think about it, so our bodies have evolved all kinds of different things to help us in response to being sick. And some of those things that we think of as symptoms, well, yeah, they're not pleasant. They're actually the body doing something to try to become healthier. So when we get a fever, right, as opposed to our first response of, oh, I have a fever of 100, I've got 101, I want to bring this fever down right away. So a fever is actually our body's response to stop replication. So viral or bacterial replication, because viruses and most viruses and bacteria replicate best at about our body's temperature. So, around 98 degrees. If the body pumps up its temperature to 101, 102, so it's actually taking the environment out of the comfort zone of that virus, out of the comfort zone of that bacteria. So it's not going to be able to be as healthy and reproduce as well. So the body is doing its thing, and that can be very, very helpful. And in a lot of children's hospitals, whereas they used to immediately give something to bring a fever down, now they don't immediately give something. When is a fever a problem? If you've started to spike, 105, yeah, you're going to have to bring it down. That's too hot. 104 maybe, depending on your strength. you've got to start bringing something down, when it gets too high. And there are herbs, or there's, ibuprofen or whatever, but there are also herbs that help bring a fever down. Or getting into just a lukewarm bath, just to bring the fever back down. Or if you've just had a fever for a really long time and your body is exhausted, at that point you have to deal with the fever. But if, you're just getting sick and you have 101, 102 fever, okay, don't like it, not great, but this is doing something, and it's gonna, in the long run, it's gonna help me to feel better. Another is just that runny nose and the mucus, right? So it's miserable, and we don't want to do that. And so we take that medication or that thing to stop having a runny nose. But your mucus, right? So one, just when it's there on a regular basis, is protecting your tissues and keeping them moisturized, and it has antimicrobial things in it. But also when it starts to run, so it's actually taking all of that stuff out. It's taking out the viruses and the microbes, and it's a way of your body of ridding yourselves of some of the things that are inside of the body. So that's actually helping to get rid of it. And the more mucus, right, it's protecting the cells underneath. So that's another thing that's helping that we don't always enjoy so much. And then once again, just that, I am so tired. So tired, your body's telling you, okay, if I can just get some rest, then I can do what I got to do. I'm going to be able to focus on that and not on the work that I'm doing. So how do you choose what herbs you're going to use, and how do the herbs actually work? And are they different from taking like an ibuprofen or some other modern medicine? So one thing, when you think about taking herbs, and I keep saying ginger just because it's so common and so easy to find, and I'm going to put ginger through its paces in a few minutes also. So ginger or turmeric, nettles, any of those herbs, chamomile, as opposed to modern medicine. So they have a lot of different chemicals and compounds that are actively working in the body. It's like a symphony as opposed to one note. Modern medicine, so let's take aspirin, right? So aspirin, so willow and meadowsweet, right? Two herbs that we have salicylic acid in them. So as opposed to just using that whole herb, so in the 1800s, somebody took and they were able to isolate that active constituent, the thing that they decided was the most active in that herb, and turned it into aspirin. So for the first years when aspirin existed, you couldn't take it. It was so harsh on the stomach that nobody could actually use it. But then in the I can't remember what year, but late 1800s, Bayer figured out, okay, if I buffer it this way, so that's something that we can actually use, and a person can actually take it internally, and it's not going to just destroy the stomach. Whereas if you had just been drinking willow bark tea or meadowsweet, it had other compounds in it that were already buffering what was some of the effects that it would have on the stomach. So even now, right, so you have something and it's targeted very specifically, right? It's for pain relief. It brings down fever. It has these very specific things that it does. And even now, I didn't look up the stats before this, but there's thousands of people end up in the hospital from it, even at this point. And some people die from taking aspirin and from the bleeding that it causes, right? So that's on one side. But the herbs, so not only might they not cause the same what would be called side effects, but they also might have other things that they do at the same time. So I might have ginger. So I might have something like ginger, which is an antiviral, right? So let's say I'm coming down with something and I'm using, I'm taking ginger tea. I also, let's say I'm also like just nauseous from whatever's going on. So ginger is also something that's really good for nausea. So then I've got two things going on. right? So if I have those two symptoms, I'm thinking, okay, ginger, that might be great. Let's say also, in addition, I'm just cold and I cannot get myself to warm up. Ginger is warming. So if I have that pattern of symptoms, wow, I have this thing that's got a number of different actions, and I can use that and work with that to be able to treat all of those different things at once. So we'll go through a number of different herbs. So when I think about what herbs do I want to have in my house, so I'm thinking, okay, so here we are coming up into the winter time, and there's colds and there's flus, and maybe in my particular family, I know that every fall somebody gets a sinus infection, a bacterial sinus infection, or I know that I have somebody who tends towards upset stomachs, and so I know I've got these winter things coming up. And then I have this other set of things too, the viruses and something with the stomach or whatever it is. So those are the things that I'm going to want to have in my house, and I'm going to want to have easily accessible. And those are also the herbs that people will actually take. So when I get stressed, lavender tea, lavender oils. I love lavender, right? So I have lavender here, but I only have a limited use of lavender, especially the oils, because of the scent. My husband hates lavender, right? So I'm not going to have lavender for him. He loves chamomile. So I'm going to have chamomile. So it's got to be something, okay, what is somebody actually going to be willing to take? Things are only effective if you actually use them and work with them. So, and especially for children, there are any number of different ways, and we'll look at some of those things, different ways that you can work with herbs so that they're really nice tasting. And thinking about that line of food and medicinal. So there are a lot of things, that are wandering that line and can go either direction depending on how much you use and how much you're using it. So I might put ginger in a stir fry, but I also have a ginger syrup. And maybe for my kids, I might have a ginger elderberry jello or a popsicle, because if somebody in my family gets a lot of sore throats and they need just something cool and soothing. So I'm thinking, okay, popsicle form, really great, because it can be there I can make it at the beginning of the month, and it might stay for a few months actually and just be preserved that way. So I'm thinking, what's the convenient way to use it? And how are we going to work with it? And what I have in my family might be very different, or for myself might be quite different because of tastes or tendencies to illness than in another household. So it's going to depend on those individuals. When we're learning herbs, so I know that when I first started to learn herbs, I was so excited to learn them, and I wanted to know 50 herbs, 100 herbs. This was so fun. This was so cool. I'm just going to learn herbs and herbs and herbs and herbs and more. Not, in my opinion, at this point, a good way to go about it. It's better to know, say, 5 to 10 herbs really, really well than try to know a lot of herbs on the surface, just like having a couple of really good friends versus like a whole bunch of acquaintances. So, and how do you learn an herb? Just working with it. So you taste it and you use it and you work with it in different ways, and keep kind of track. How does this affect somebody? Was this effective against a cold or flu? Did somebody actually take it? Did they like it? Did they not like it? If I put it with, somebody keeps getting a cough. So if I put ginger with cherry bark, which is good for a cough, is that better? And keeping track of recipes. How does it taste? How does it smell? Does it make me feel warm? So there's something I call body literacy, which we tend not to do as much nowadays. which is just as you use, I don't like the word use, as I work with an herb, just how does it actually make me feel, right? So some things you might take and they'll make your mouth feel super dry. So you know they're kind of drying. Or you might have something and it's very warming. Or you might have something that you take it and immediately your stomach. I had somebody who had heartburn and we were playing around with some herbs, right? And the second they took something, they're like, I can feel that. I can feel the difference, right? And it's not something I'm reading that says, this herb does X, Y, and Z. It's my body is saying, oh, this did this, right? And maybe I want to write it down. I want to write, whatever the herb is and some notes about it that I keep track of. And it's better to know those 10 herbs, and especially because they have numerous actions, than it is to try and do too many of them. All right. So that being said, so where do we, before I jump in and start making things, where do we get herbs? So some things, ginger, thyme, rosemary, you can get at the grocery store. Some things are what I call gardening. So out in the yard, there are a lot of dandelions are a seriously great herb. Plantain, not the plantain, that's the banana looking thing, but just, I didn't make a picture of it, but just a little green plant that's in a lot of people's yards. So that's another place. Or if you can recognize like trees, oak trees, different things that's a place to get things. Or you can also order them. And after this, people who are interested can have, the library will send some sheets, and one of those sheets will have, where you can order herbs from. But if you're ordering herbs or if you're buying herbs, you want to make sure that something that started out green is still green. You don't want it to look really brown and dead. If it's something like peppermint, when you open it up, it should, peppermint, you should have that smell. If you open up a jar of peppermint and there's nothing there, there's nothing there. So you want to make sure that the herbs are good quality. And I'll send out some things afterwards so that you can see where to get those. All right. So when we're working with herbs, one way is just cooking. But then there's that next step up, which is basically just cooking. So you can make an herbal tea. One of my very favorite things, if you haven't noticed, is ginger. I love working with ginger. It's easily accessible and it's tasty, and you can just do so many different things with it. So ginger, right? So it helps stimulate circulation. It's antiviral. It helps with digestion, particularly if somebody is nauseous. It's warming. It's tasty. So one of my favorite things to make, I don't know if it's a favorite thing to make because I make it when I'm not feeling well, but for if I'm feeling under the weather, or even just as a preventative, something's going around, I've been someplace where I'm a little worried, whatever, is just making a ginger lemonade tea. I'm going to disappear for 1 second because I keep my ginger in the freezer, and I'll explain why I keep ginger in the freezer when I come back from getting it from the freezer. All right, ginger root. So I am just going to make ginger lemonade. Who likes to drink ginger lemonade? Just about everybody. This is a favorite, and this is easy for adults, easy for kids to drink, and it's an easy way to dose it as well. So ginger lemonade, I just have a cup with a strainer in it, but if you don't have a strainer, just any kitchen strainer is fine, whatever. My camera's kind of slipped down. Put that back up. All right. So the reason I have ginger that's frozen, so I don't know if anybody has ever tried to grate ginger, and it's got these stringy things that are super annoying. So what I do is So you can just have, just your average grater. I have this grater that I have here specifically for herbs, but just your kitchen grater, just on the smaller kind of a grating surface. So if it's frozen, you don't get that stringy thing that makes it hard to grate. So what I want is, and this is how you dose this, is so I have about 1 thumb's worth of ginger. So for me, this would be my dose. For somebody who's larger, they would have a bigger thumb, so you'd have a little bit more ginger in there. For a child, they have a little teeny thumb, and so you'd have less ginger in there. So it kind of works in that way. Right, and then I'm just going to grate the ginger, and it grates fairly quickly. And all of these recipes, if you want, you can get at the end as well. I'm not going to have you watch me grate this. If I was Rachel Rayer on Food Network, I probably would have had somebody who had grated this beforehand. But all right, so let's just imagine that this is grated all the way, right? And this is just going to go into my strainer, just right in here. So I'm going to put this in, and then I want a little bit of lemon juice. So you can just take it, squeeze a half a lemon, or, right, if you have lemon juice in a jar, just whatever the equivalent of a half a lemon is. So this is a tablespoon. I'm going to put that in, and then I'm just going to add hot water, and that's the whole thing. If I was coming down with something and I really wanted to be on top of it, I might make an entire quart's worth of this and put it just into, if it doesn't have to actually be a mason jar, but just any quart jar that you want to recycle also could work. Then, right, just add my hot water. And I'm going to let it sit for about 15-20 minutes. And at this point too, or maybe when it's a little cooler, you just add honey to taste. If the ginger taste is too strong for you, add a little bit more water and dilute it. So this is it's got just boiled water, and now it's going to steep. And that's called making an infusion. So any herb, or most herbs, that are from a leaf or a flower, something that's in the aerial part of a plant and is a softer part of the plant, you make an infusion. You boil your kettle, you pour water over it, you let it steep, as opposed to a tea bag of something, which you might have about a teaspoon of it, of say chamomile, and you steep it for 5 minutes. So, right, this is a difference, bumping it up from just a beverage to maybe something more medicinal. So you'd have it a tablespoon, and generally about a tablespoon to a cup, and then let it steep 15-20 minutes at least, if not longer. So this is going happily steeping right here. And then I'll add honey to taste. This is a little side trip, but so this is actually a ginger plant, which is something that grows in the tropics. But if you take an organic piece of ginger, just as something fun to do on the side, and you leave it out to dry just on a table for a few weeks, it'll start to grow a little knob on it. And that knob then became this plant. So that was just fun. Anyways, so that's a ginger tea. If, knowing that ginger is one of the herbs that I really like working with and is really good for my family, and my kids like it, and my grandkids like it, and my husband will even have it. So I also make a ginger syrup. And that way, right, because sometimes if you're not feeling well, you don't want to take the time to make the tea. Oh, but there is a trick there too. So I will make a syrup. The trick that you can do for the ginger also is that I will grate the ginger. So I have a thumb's worth of ginger and then that tablespoon of lemon juice. And I'll make, 10 servings or whatever. And then I'll put those into ice cube trays, not with any water, just the ginger and lemon juice and maybe some honey, but usually just the ginger and the lemon juice. And then I just put it into ice cube trays. Each ice cube tray has one cup of tea worth in it. And that way I can even just pop it out of the ice cube trays, put that into a Ziploc bag. And then if I'm not feeling well, I don't have to sit and grate ginger, which I may not want to do when I'm not feeling well. I can just take that frozen ice cube and just put it in, pour my hot water on it, and I am good to go. And if I wanted that quart of tea, so then I have 4 ice cubes and put it in, 4 ginger cubes. All right, so the next step up, and here I'm going to add in a couple of other herbs, and depending what I want to do, I might add some different things. But as I do make a ginger syrup, so this I'm going to make as a decoction. And a decoction is just something that you simmer on low heat depends on what you're doing with the decoction, but you're going to be simmering it on low. So this, I'm still sticking with my ginger. So you can just kind of see some of the different things that ginger can do. So here, I'm just going to take about 4 ounces of fresh ginger root. And this actually was frozen, but this we don't have to. And I'm just going to put it into little slices. And you don't have to peel it. And I'm just going to slice. And then, or you can also do this in the blender if you want to do this a little quicker. So I'm going to slice the ginger. And once again, I'm not going to go all the way to slice everything, but just imagine this is all sliced. And that's going to go into my pot. So that's ginger. And then I'm going to add something called Chinese skullcap. And that is, it inhibits viral replication. It's anti-inflammatory. There's some studies that are starting to show that it may regulate cytokine storms or cytokine reactions. And it's also active against some bacteria. So I am going to take and you can get it from a place called Pacific Botanicals. So I'm going to take and put that in. And this is, so I have a little scale, I have a kitchen scale, and I need a 1/2 ounce of this. So that's going to go in. And then echinacea. So echinacea is something that may actually maybe be a little overused at this point. But echinacea, it helps to move your lymph. It helps stimulate white blood cell production, aids in antibody formation. And so I really like to use that. One is if I have something that I have a lot of swollen lymph nodes with. I'm trying to think what else. Sore throats. Oh, so sore throats. If you put it in a spray and or gargle with it and it gets actually onto your sore throat, it's good at alleviating sore throats. So I'm going to put in, I'm just trying to see what. Right, and that's the root. And there's different kinds of echinacea. There's purpurea and angustifolia. I tend to use a little bit of each in things. So I'm going to put in some root. I have weights that you can put in, but I'm just going to. Then I'm going to add 2 cups of water. And I'm going to make this as a decoction. And when I'm decocting something, I'm also going to put the lid on it. And that way, all of those active constituents, all those chemicals that are going to be helping make me healthy aren't just like going off into the air as it boils. So I don't want this to be on a hard boil. I'm just going to put it on a low simmer. All right. So that's just going to be working on a low simmer right there. And hopefully, so what I'm doing with this, so when I make a syrup, so I could be making just a regular decoction, which would be just like making something that's going to be a tea. And that, it would probably simmer about 15, 20 minutes, something like that. If I'm making a syrup, I'm actually going to simmer it long enough so it simmers down so the liquid is about half of what I started. So I started with 2 cups. And a way that I help remember that before I actually get this started going is I just take a marker that you can erase, and I just mark where this is because I'm going to want about half of this at the end, and that just kind of helps me eyeball it. That's doing its thing right here. So, okay, so we've got a tea going, we've got a decoction, an infusion going, we've got a decoction going. I'm going to now use another herb. So there's a lot of different things that I can use if I'm starting to get sick or for prevention. So this is an herb that I use as prevention. So starting in, well, actually, usually starting in September, but actually now starting a few years ago and using frequently. So I have something called astragalus, which is also a root. And astragalus is an herb that helps to modulate the immune system and strengthen it. It supports lung function and helps adrenals. It's moistening. I tend to get dry coughs just in general, and that's good. COVID tends to be kind of more of a dry, stuck sort of a condition. And so, well, I wouldn't use this actually when I have COVID because it's used more for prevention. It is keeping things moist in there. This is something that actually traditionally is not taken when you have an active illness. So this is astragalus, and it's a root, and sometimes it looks like little tongue depressors, and sometimes it's cut up like this. And so you can also make a tincture. And if you have a tincture, then it's something that you have there all the time. It's very easily accessible. Reaching over to get the things that I need. So a tincture or an extract. So if you've gone to a health food store, I don't know if they have it in other places. Yeah, so if you go to sometimes in a pharmacy and they have just those little things that are alcohol-based herbs, and they maybe have a whole set of shelves of them, and they're very expensive in general. Those are your extracts and tinctures. When I'm thinking about how do I want to make something, so water is really good at extracting certain chemicals or compounds and molecules from an herb. Alcohol might take out some other things as well. So if I have something that's got water and alcohol, like brandy or gin or tequila, anything that's like a 40% alcohol, 50% alcohol. So it's going to be extracting more and different things, quite possibly from the herb. And because it's alcohol based, as opposed to the tea, which you can hold on to for in the fridge for a couple of days at most, maybe. If you're making a tincture, it will last for years. And then you've just got it once you've made it. Expensive at the store, much less expensive if you make it at home. And it's super easy. So here, so I'm taking that astragalus, which is something, this is a great one for put in soup. It has kind of a bland taste. So if I'm ever making soups or stews or anything like that, I'll make a little bag of it, and put that into my soup or stew. You'll want to pull it back out afterwards. But anytime you're doing anything that's got a long, slow simmer on it, this is great to put in there. Even if you're making rice or something, if you just put it in a little bag or something and put it in. So here's how you make a tincture. So this is just the folk method that people have been doing for for hundreds of years, right? And I'm just going to fill a jar, and usually I have a whole bunch of this, so I don't need to make a lot. I would use a quart jar, and I would fill it about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way full, right? So now I've got my astragalus in here, and this doesn't matter if it's a root or if it's a leaf, whatever it is. So I've got that, and then I'm going to take brandy. I could take vodka, could be gin, anything that's in that 40% alcohol level. And so I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to fill the jar so that it covers it. And then if it was in a quart jar, by about 1 inch or 2 extra, right? So now I have this in here. I'm going to put the cap on. If I had thought about it, I would bring just a piece of masking tape and I would label this the date and what's in here so that to make sure I know. I think I'm going to remember, but I'm not. And then I give it a shake. And every day for 4 weeks, I just give it a shake. And I leave this in a, just like in a dark spot that I'm going to remember in my cabinet in my kitchen, right? And just give it that shake. And that's, at the end of, I didn't bring my straining things here, right? So that's one way to make it. And this has alcohol in it and it's gonna last for years. And every day you can just take a dropper full of the strained tincture. I would have to run and get my straining thing. So I usually just take just a strainer, and then I have just the kitchen towel, and I strain it through the kitchen towel and squeeze it through. So that's how I just strain it at the end. So that's one way that I can do this. The other thing that I can do okay, so we've done astragalus. We'll do, yeah, all right, we'll do another astragalus one. So the other thing, so let's say you have kids or you have somebody who can't actually take or doesn't want to take alcohol. So another way you can do something, it's not quite as strong as an extract, but it also is something that lasts for a long time, but it's sweet. So kids will take it and depending on the adult too. So I've got that same jar, but now instead, I'm going to make something with glycerin, which is related to alcohol, and it's just a nice sweet thing. So when I make a glycerite, just like the alcohol was oops, that's boiling a little too hard. So just like the alcohol was 40% alcohol and 60% water. So here, the glycerite, I'm going to want to have it about 60% glycerin and 40% water. So this is easy to do if you're working in milliliters. So I'm just adjusting my simmer here. So this is, I get glycerin in huge jars, so I've just put it in an easier pouring container. So I'm just going to look here and I'm going to put 60 ml of glycerin. So that's my 60 ml of glycerin. And then just so that it lasts longer and is preserved a little bit better, I can either use, if I have a really good filter on my sink, or I tend to use distilled water, just picked up at the store. So if I have 60 here, I need another 40, so I need it to come up to 100 milliliters. And we're going to add the distilled water. Right, so I'm just adding distilled water. And now I'm going to give that a stir, and I've made a glycerite. And you'll see these too at the health food stores and whatever. You know, a lot of times you might see an elderberry glycerite. And I'll talk about elderberry in a minute too. So here's my glycerin, and I'm just going to stir that up. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take my astragalus, put it 2/3 to 3/4 of the way. something like this. And then I'm just going to pour the glycerin over it, right? So here's that glycerite that I made. I'm just going to pour the glycerin in water. Make sure that it's well covered. And I do the same thing. Give it a shake every day. Leave it in the cupboard until I'm ready to strain it in 4 weeks from now. So now, in very little time, you can see how easy it is, right? So we've got a tincture started. We've got a glycerite started. We've got a tea, and we've got this decoction going. All right. So, let me just clear this off. I can see my notes again. So if it's flu season, and we talked about how you do things in different stages, and maybe use some different herbs at different stages as well. So I'm going to want to start out and have using things that are preventative. So that astragalus is good. Maybe some echinacea. A favorite is just using shiitake. So shiitake mushrooms, which you can find, just at the store, either dried or in the freezer section. They stimulate the immune response and they taste great. So if you're using mushrooms of any kind, you want to make sure to cook them. So this would go into stews and soups and things like that. So that's shiitake mushroom. If I'm actually at that stage, so I might have an astragalus shiitake mushroom soup, right? Just as preventative. I might be using a little bit more ginger. If I'm actually thinking that there's something going around, so then I'm definitely going to be taking ginger syrup. I might be using elderberries as well, right? Which also, so elderberries are also one of those things that interfere with viral replication. So that's another one that I could use, and that's very tasty. If I'm actually starting to come down with something, so I do go heavy on the ginger syrup, and then I add the skull cap in there. And then if depending on what I'm feeling, so I might add maybe some cherry bark into something to help, because that's a really nice expectorant that you can have. Licorice root is antiviral. It helps with the digestive tract, and it's an expectorant as well. So that's something as I'm coming down with something, I might add some licorice root in as well. And then if I actually have that starting to have a dry cough, so cherry bark is an expectorant, but pleurisy root, so which is also called butterfly weed. So if you have that milkweed that has the bright orange flowers on it, that's pleurisy root. And that is a really good expectorant, and it's traditionally, one of its traditional uses was for pleurisy, but it's a really good anti-inflammatory for the lungs, and was used for bronchitis and pneumonia as well. A nice side benefit is that if anybody has frozen shoulder, if you make a tincture of pleurisy root and take a little, like a dropper full internally, and just rub some on the frozen shoulder, it helps with frozen shoulder as well. So that's some of the things that I might be using at that point. So if I have a cough of some kind, there's just the classic tablespoon of water for a salt gargle. You can get, or you can make the tincture. If you make an echinacea tincture with golden seal, and I'll give the recipes for this as well, and you just spray that at the back of the throat. That's an on-contact antimicrobial. So that's something that's really nice to make, and you can get sprays, or you can buy the echinacea golden seal sprays. So at this point, we'll just imagine that our decoction has gone down halfway. And so this is all you need to do to make a syrup. So, all right. So you're just going to strain out all the herbs from here, right? And I'm just going to pour in the liquid. Oops, I'm making a mess. All right. So here, I've got approximately 1 cup of liquid. At this point, I can just add a little bit of honey to this and a little bit of Jello or gelatin to it, and that will make it into a Jello. I could add a little bit of honey to taste and turn this into a popsicle if I wanted. Or I can turn it into a syrup, which is just a classic way to take something. So I would normally let this just cool down a little bit. And then for every cup of decoction that I have, I would use a half a cup of honey. And that's all it's going to take. I like ginger and lemon, so I'm actually going to so this is just some lemon juice from a jar. I'm going to add, and there's a recipe for this. I'm going to add the lemon juice in. So if this was just a decoction for drinking, I would just put in honey to taste. Because this is actually going into a syrup, you need a certain amount of sugar to preserve this. So I have, about a cup in here, a little over a cup. So I need at least a half a cup of honey. And I would want this to be cool because this is raw honey and the heat is going to destroy the enzymes. But there we go. And then I give this a stir. And then I have a syrup. And that's all it is to make a syrup. It's super, super easy. And then I just let this cool down and I put it in a jar. And that's it. So we have, and I'm boiling this still. So you can see some of the different things that you can make, some of the different herbs that you can use. And I will, if you would like, you can be sent lists of the herbs and their actions as well, and how to make all of these different things and the recipes. All right, so that's it. Yeah, so just to remember, take care of your basic health, that baseline of sleep, diet, stress, relationships, and then build onto it with the astragalus, the shiitake for prevention. If you're actually worried about something, adding in the ginger, some echinacea, some licorice, and then if, going that one more step of treating symptoms as well. So that's it. And if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
What would be, one of the questions that you have is, what would be your first line of defense for a cold? If you feel like you're getting sick, what would be the first steps?
So the first thing that I would do is, one, I would go to bed. Two, I would take the ginger tea or ginger syrup. That would be my first thing that I would do. If you have, or elderberry, ginger or elderberry, either one of those, and take that frequently. Like, so if I had a ginger syrup, like take a tablespoon every hour, every 2 hours, and just really try to stop the viral replication. That's where I would start.
And then overall, you had said the first things that you should do to address your health would be to address your baseline. So increase sleep, get your rest, make sure that you're keeping your space nice and moist so that it's allowing the cells to do what they need to do. Is there anything else that someone should be doing? Like if they're worried going in with the new variant and we're supposed to have a bad flu season, like what would be your first steps preventatively?
So preventatively, so my first steps, right. So the first steps preventatively would be to just make sure all those baseline things are in place. So that's the sleep, that's the good diet, that's having the humidity and the drinking, making sure I'm having, talking to people and having not being isolating myself if possible. So that would be the baseline of things that I would do coming into the season. I would be making, so what am I doing? So those things. And then I make soup like every week, a lot of soup. And I put in shiitake and astragalus in it, sometimes the ginger. sometimes turmeric also, which is anti-inflammatory. And then that soup I can drink as soup, or I can put it in if I'm cooking rice. So I'll use that as the liquid for the rice. I'll use it in the stew. I'll use it any place where I need a liquid. And then I'm constantly getting something that's supporting my immune system. So that would be the next layer of prevention that I would be doing.
All right. And that was all that we had online for the questions. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Rivka. This was very informative. Someone who struggles with sinus infections frequently throughout the winter.
So I'm going to add in someone who struggles. So I'm going to add in another thing about. So if you're a person who struggles with sinus infections, there are some herbs that are specific, but one of the things that you can do, so just take a big handful of thyme and put that into a pot and make a steam, and then just take a towel over your head and just breathe in, and that's really good for a sinus infection. There's some other things we can talk, but that would be something to do for sinus infection, or if you're coming down with something, actually, anything that if you're starting to have a cold or any of those things, a thyme steam also.
Oh, very good. I'm going to add that to my list. All right. Well, thank you very much. And you had said you had the recipe. So if anyone is looking to get a copy of the recipe, you can please feel free to email us at the email address quref@ocln.org. Again, you can email us for the recipes at quref@ocln.org. And thank you very much, Rivka. This was really great and really informative and very timely.
Thank you.